Hi there, viewers. Today, I'm joining in conversation with Micheal Evert, the host of the Fit to be Read channel. For those who don't know Micheal, I left a link in the description part of this video to his channel. You'll be able to find out more about him and his works there. Welcome on the show, Micheal.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been great getting to know you since I've joined BookTube, and this friendship that we've built has really enriched me. And it's one of the things about BookTube that I love so much is making friends. And I'm really happy that we have become friends, and it's great to be talking to you today.
Yeah, it's so exciting too from my end here. Now, Micheal, you are an ardent lover of science fiction because I've watched quite a lot of your videos and I see that you love science fiction so much. It's obvious from the kind of books you review on your channel, Fit to be Read, which I've left a link in the description box for viewers who would love to check it out. Now, let's hear from you. How do you fall in love with science fiction?
Sure. I've been reading science fiction for a long time, 3 decades worth, probably at least. And it started out with a book, a little known book, not really, it's a very well known book, Foundation by Isaac Asimov,
Wow.
and another Ender's Game. Those were the first two science fiction books that I read, and they just captivated me. And when I think about why do I love science fiction so much, I think about the exploration and the ideas of it. And, I think about this Earth and this planet that we live on. I connect with those explorers in history who, had an imagination of what could be out there, what could be on the frontier, what could be in other lands, sailing around the world, going to the depths of the ocean. And while I feel, there's still so much of this world to be explored, especially in the depths of the ocean, I think the real amazing, mind-blowing stuff that exists in this universe that we have no idea about or that we can't even fathom is somewhere out there. And because I had the experience right off the bat with Isaac Asimov, who is the master of big philosophical science fiction ideas, it just blew my mind. The idea that he could imagine a galactic empire and what it would be like millennia in the future. That's the scope of the imagination. I just fell in love.
Well, that's very great because I've heard quite a lot of people, including some writers of science fiction, say, Isaac Asimov is their source of motivation. Isaac Asimov is this, Isaac Asimov is that. And I think it's high time I get myself also experiencing one of Isaac Asimov novel. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, he's definitely, an icon of classic science fiction. And the science fiction he wrote is a lot different than what modern science fiction, I think, looks like. And obviously, modern science fiction is very diverse in the directions it goes. But the most common thing you'll hear from folks who are not fans of Isaac Asimov, but are science fiction fans, is the lack of depth to his characters. But he didn't really write about characters. He wrote about ideas. He wrote about imagination and about exploration. So the intent wasn't to create great characters. It was to create this philosophy and this imagination of what could be and what could be out there.
Oh, that's great. That's quite fascinating to me. Now, who is your best science fiction author? Tell us about these books that you've read and you'd love to recommend to the viewers.
Yes. Well, if you watch my channel, and I know that you do, you know that I never really play by the rules. So I'm going to tell you a bunch of my favorite authors. I love, obviously, Isaac Asimov is up there. Ursula Le Guin, author of Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, The Lathe of Heaven. You know that I like Nnedi Okorafor's writing a lot, author of Lagoon, Who Fears Death, the Binti series, and more. Neil Stevenson, Greg Egan, Ray Bradbury, and who am I leaving off? And Adrian Tchaikovsky and Samuel R. Delany. So that's kind of my group of authors that I just absolutely love.
Wow, that's quite interesting. Now, in my opinion, and what I've read of most science fiction novels, I see that most science fiction novels will make a good film. Now, let's say from you, do you have any science fiction novel that you've read and you'd love it to be in form of a movie?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, I'm in some science fiction Facebook groups and things like that. And that's a question that comes up. It's something I have thought about before. The obvious one is one that's been done before, and that's Ender's Game. And that was a movie that was done well, but I think it could be done so much better. And it's such an important book to me and the character of Ender Wiggin is such an empathy-evoking character, and that's what's so profound about that novel. And I think that could be done in a much better way if that was filmed again. As far as things that I don't know if they've been filmed or not, and if they did, they were filmed a long time ago. 2 novels by Alfred Bester. One is The Star's My Destination. That's about this character, Gully Foyle. He's a character. He's irredeemable, but he is the kind of anti-hero of the story. He's left on an abandoned spacecraft that's been damaged, and he's passed by. So when he eventually gets back to the Earth after all the harrowing things he had to go through to get there, he's out for vengeance. And it's a really great revenge tale. And I think with the right director, that could be done well. And the other one by him is The Demolished Man. And that one is a whodunit detective story set in the future. And that one's really great because it's a whodunit, but you already know who did it. And that doesn't dampen the experience at all. The experience is still really phenomenal because it's a world where they have espers, people who can read minds. And the person who's going to be investigating the murderer, who head of a giant company, this detective is an esper, so he can read minds. So the murderer has to come up with all these plans on how to get away with murder. And it's a really phenomenal book, and I think that could be done really well. And then another, maybe one more, and this Nnedi Okorafor's Lagoon. I would love to see that written. I don't know how. Actually, I do know how true this is because I think I did see her talking about this on on a video on YouTube. But that was sort of part of the inspiration of writing that was sort of a reaction to how Africa was treated in the writing of the film District 9. And Africans were not portrayed very well in the film. So she sort of wrote this as this first contact story to give a little bit of unfiltered still, but a fairer shake to the continent, so to speak. And it's a really fantastic goal. And there's a mysticism around it and mythology around it that I think could really translate well on the screen.
Wow, that sounds quite interesting to me. I love the sound of that, especially you mentioning that of Nnedi Okorafor, because I've heard I've watched a lot of your videos about books, and I'm like, wow, this is quite intriguing to me. Now, this sounds a little bit quite funny. What was the worst science fiction novel you've ever read, if you have one?
Yeah, that's a hard one. On my channel, I always talk about when I do book reviews. There's always a little bit of
5 dislikes.
There's always 5 likes or 5 dislikes.
Yeah.
And I always tell you, is this book fit to be read? And the secret is they're all fit to be read. Even books that were not my favorite books, they're fit to be read for one reason or another. And I try to get that across in my reviews. Yeah. So the book I'm going to tell you now, I give a little disclaimer that this was still an enjoyable book. And it's a very well-written book, but it fell flat for me. And that was a new release last year by Kazuo Ishiguro, a author who I generally like. And he wrote a book called Clara and the Sun. And it met really positive reviews when it came out. And I felt like a lot of that came from the fact of it was him writing it. I think that the book was really underwhelming. And I think what it sought to do, it did not do. And making it even more difficult was that because I've read a lot of classic science fiction, there are a lot of things that happens in that book. And even the general premise of the book, and artificial intelligence, and examining what it means to be human, that is a recurring theme in science fiction that's been done so many times. And by the greatest in science fiction. It's been done by Asimov. It's been done by Philip K. Dick. Wow. It's been done by Stanislaw Lem and Ian M. Banks. And it's been done much better, and it's been done amazingly. So this book just didn't match up to that for me.
Oh, sorry about that. Now, from watching your reviews, I see that you're an ardent lover of Nnedi Okorafor's write-up. And sometimes when you pronounce her name, I do laugh whenever I'm watching your review. Now, could you tell us what intrigues you about her writing, and which of her books do you love most?
That's a good question. I've been asked that question a lot too by people like, where do I start with, and I'll say it again, Nnedi Okorafor. Where do I start with her work. You can give me a tutorial later on the pronunciation. But what I love about her, it's the prose. When I read it and the words just jump off your page, I mentioned some of my other favorite authors, two authors that I feel like if they read the phone book, I would still love it if they did an adaptation of it, because the prose is just so poetic, flowery, beautiful. Ray Bradbury is a lot like that too. It's just, the ideas are great and the story is great, but there's just a choice of words and a choice of language. And, one of the books that isn't my first one to recommend is a novella that she wrote a year or two ago called Remote Control. And it's, I forget where it is. I think it was in Ghana that it's set. And she just talks, the story is great, storytelling, but then she's just explaining like the red soil from the ground is splashed on the wall of the white wall of a stone wall of a house. And there's maybe a concrete fence outside, has broken glass across the top. Little details that are not necessary to the story, but it just enriches the story and it creates such a vivid imagery. And I love when I read books because I can't always picture things in my head when I read and fine. But when I do, I love it. And she gives good care and attention to building the world and creating the visual. And it just makes it so much more immersive for me. As for the books that I would recommend or my favorite books by her, I would have to say for science, a lot of her stuff is sort of a mix of science fiction and fantasy, but I would, in the science fiction category, I would say Lagoon, which I already mentioned. And then I think for the more blend science fiction fantasy, probably more fantasy than science fiction, I would say Who Fears Death, which is a really great one set in future Japan.
Wow, that's quite interesting. That's pretty much amazing. Now, apart from science fiction, what other genres of literature interest you?
So I will say that since I started booktubing and trying to always put out content, I started booktubing, and then I thought about all these books. I've read so many science fiction books, and I thought I want to review all these books because I love them so much, but that means I have to reread them. So all of my reading time now is pretty much all science fiction.
Wow.
When I'm reading science fiction, I do like historical fiction. A favorite that comes to mind is Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, which is a great historical fiction novel. And then another one is MMK's The Far Pavilions, which is set in India. I like things that are set in different countries. I like translations. And the why I think is because, and I think this goes back to why I like Okorafor as well. People from places that are not where I'm from and people that look like me, those are the people I want to hear from, because again, it really ties back to what I was saying about Asimov and the imagination. There's such a different experience that goes into the writing. It's much more likely to be unfamiliar to me, and there's more for me to explore in that writing. And I love that. I love that, to see that different perspective. And I can't always articulate why the writing is different or what it is about the storytelling that's different. I just know that it's different, and it's coming from somebody who has a different background and a different perspective than I do.
Oh, that's great. That's pretty much interesting to hear. Now, some months ago, you made a video on the top 150 science fiction books that you've read. And that video is quite amazing to me, as it contains truckloads of science fiction novels, many of which I haven't even heard about. Now, I want to ask you, what inspired you to make that video?
Yeah, I got on YouTube because I love to read, and I read one of the books I was reading. It was so interesting. It was a new to me book, and I just went online because I wanted to see, is anybody else talking about this? I wanted to see what they thought, because there's a lot of things to kind of unpack about the story. Yeah. And when I did Google search, instead of seeing articles come up, I saw little clips of videos, and then I clicked on, like, what is this? Oh, BookTube. They're talking about books, and I watched a few books like that, and then boom, I started making content. I started filming video, and then I realized, I've read a lot of these books. I should do, I saw some top 10 lists and whatever. I said, wouldn't it be fun? And I kind of wanted to carve out a name for myself a little bit on BookTube. I said, wouldn't it be fun to do a top 50, top 100, top whatever list? And so I started coming down with my ideas, and like they just flowed out of me. I got to my list and I was up to like 170 books. I'm like, oh my God, this is too long. So I pared it down. So I wanted it to be just stuff that I like really, really enjoyed. So even at 150, it was stuff that I really, really liked and would recommend. And then the idea of this was, I'm just celebrating these books. Yes, it's a ranking, but it's really, I want to celebrate all of these books.
Yeah.
And then created the list, and I gave, 3 or 4 cents on each book, and just to kind of say why it was great. And then it could be a resource. People love lists, right? But it's also, a lot of us go on to BookTube, not just to create, but because we want recommendations. And I like to think that this is a video that folks could use as a resource when they say, hey, I want a new science fiction read. Let me scroll through if there's something I like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have also watched some videos like that on YouTube. The top 10 indie author books, top 120 science fiction read, top 100, etc., historical book, etc. And I think it's actually a good idea. It's pretty much a good idea. Now, tell us about, I think you've answered this question along the interview so far, but tell us about Fit to be Read. Why did you start the channel?
Sure. So where I am right now, usually this is not what I film, but I'm at work. I own a personal training gym in Washington, D.C. It's the oldest personal training gym in Northwest Washington, D.C., and it's called Fit. So when I started this channel, I wasn't planning to. I just put just for fun, after I watched those videos, I put actually, it was an old computer and it had a built-in webcam, and I turned it on and I just filmed myself talking about the books, and I did 5 likes and 5 dislikes. Yeah. And it's sort of born from there. But I wear the same thing every day. I'm always wearing a Fit t-shirt, either this one or I have a bunch of different other varieties of it. So yeah, you know what? I'm probably going to be filming it in here all the time. I'm not going to have time to change. I'm just going to throw on the video, and I'm going to do it with my work clothes on. So I said, okay, then I'll just call the channel Fit to be Read, a little bit of a play on words. Yeah. And it just evolved from there. Luckily, I got a better camera than the old 10-year-old. Hopefully improve the production quality a little bit better.
Yeah, that's great. That's fascinating. And I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, the book I had read was, and this is an old one, so surprised I haven't read it yet, but what another trainer of science fiction recommended it to me was Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is now one of my all-time favorite science fiction books. And so I just wanted to find out more about it and see what people were saying. And again, that's how I discovered BookTube.
Oh, that's great. Now, tell us, what book are you currently reading? Do you have one?
Yeah, so usually I'm always reading 2 books at a time. I usually have one here, which I don't usually get to read. So that's usually a smaller book, but I don't want to be called out a book. So I have one here, and then I usually have one at home. But lately I've been reading 2 or 3 at a time. I just finished reading The Membranes by Chital Wei. That's translated fiction from Chinese. Wow. I just finished Light from Uncommon Stars, and I was doing that as a buddy read with Erica from The Broken Spine, another really great booktuber. And I just finished Eyes of the Void, which is the sequel to Shards of Earth by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Just an amazing, amazing new series. And then, so now what I'm reading is I'm starting Goliath, which I'm also doing as a buddy read with Erica. Wow. And that's by Onya Buchi, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly as well. And a book that you recommended to me, I'm about 3 pages in, The Chronicar by your buddy, Steve Bellinger. And I'm loving it so far.
Wow, that's great. I'm pretty much, happy to hear about that.
Yeah, I take recommendations seriously. I watch a lot of BookTube and a lot of things that are not necessarily things I would read, like fantasy stuff and like that. And I still love to watch those channels, and I sort of get my fill of fantasy and stuff just by watching those channels. But there are people who do reviews, and the way they talk about books, that I just know that I trust their taste. So when I said to you, give me a recommendation, and you brought up the Chronicar, I picked it up like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, Micheal, who are you shouting out to? Would you love to shout out to other booktubers or friends on here?
Yeah, so I made some. There are a lot of people that I really like watching their channels, but I'm going to shout out some people that are just on my mind right now. A lot of people who've been just really welcoming or have become friends or I really respect. So the first people that come to mind are Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany, Erica, who I from the book, The Broken Spine.
The Bookish Spine. I think I heard about that too. I know.
Yeah, check her out. She's great. Rachel from The Shades of Orange. She does science fiction, a little bit of fantasy, and a lot of horror. So if you like horror, that's a good recommendation. Mike's Book Reviews is wonderful. He's great. And those are I don't want to overwhelm the video, but those are the first.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's pretty much interesting. Yeah.
How about you? Who are you going to shout out today?
Who did I shout out to? I got a lot of them. Okay, I'm shouting out to BookZealots. I don't know if she'll be watching this now. I'm shouting out to BookToriaQuest. I'm shouting out to BookToriaQuest. I'm shouting out to Running to Write. I'm just trying to get them from off my head. I'm shouting out to Epic Tales. I'm shouting out to who can I remember right now?
I'm gonna throw in there. I'll throw Library and Angela from LiteratureScienceAlliance. Those are great channels as well. They do a lot more fantasy, not really, maybe a little bit of science fiction.
Oh, that's interesting. I've actually I had a lot of them, but I can't remember off it. You know, it's somehow hard to get to remember just like that.
I'm probably not remembering 20 more channels.
So thank you so much, Micheal, for accepting the invitation to come on the show and talk about science fiction. And I've left a link in the description part of this interview for viewers who would love to check out Fit to be Read directly. So be sure to check him out and give him best of your support, subscribe to his channel, and I'm pretty sure you would love his works just like every other person do. So thank you very much, Micheal, for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was great to be here, and I'll catch you next time.